The dust hung thick in the air of Salvation Creek, that September afternoon, suspended like the weight of sin itself over the weathered planks of the town square. Mary Catherine Walsh had never felt more alone in a crowd of 40 people, and she had learned something about loneliness in her 3 years that most folks never would. They had come to watch her suffer. She could see it in their faces, the way their mouths curled upward at the edges, the way their eyes glinted with something that wasn't quite pity, not quite satisfaction either, but something darker and more complicated. She stood with her wrists bound by iron shackles that bit into her skin, leaving red welts that burned with every shift of her weight. The metal was hot from the sun, and it felt like the devil's own branding iron against her flesh. Her father had stolen cattle from the Hartley Ranch, 40 head that he had spirited away in the dead of night, thinking he could drive them 3 states over and sell them for enough money to save the farm. It was a foolish plan, the kind of plan that came from desperation rather than wisdom. Her father had always been desperate, ever since her mother died and left him with 3 children, and a piece of land that wouldn't yield enough corn or wheat to feed them all. But he was a good man, that was the thing. People didn't always understand that. Good men could make bad choices. Good men could break their own hearts, and the hearts of their daughters, trying to fix something that had broken them first. They had caught him 3 miles out of town, riding with 2 hands he had hired with money he didn't have. The law had been swift and merciless. They had hanged him at sunrise from the gallows that stood at the north end of Salvation Creek, the same gallows that had been painted fresh just 2 weeks prior in anticipation of a purpose they had all assumed would eventually come. Mary Catherine had watched it happen from a distance, standing beside her younger siblings behind the blacksmith shop, her hand covering her brother's eyes and her voice steady even as her knees trembled. She had not cried. There was something in her that had turned to stone at the moment the rope tightened, and she suspected it would never turn back to flesh again. But the Hartley family wasn't satisfied with a corpse. They wanted payment. They wanted restitution. They wanted Mary Catherine, the eldest of the children, bound and displayed in the town square while they paraded her failures for everyone to see. The judge, a man named Corbett who had always looked at her with a softness that made her skin crawl, had ruled that she would remain in chains until someone paid the debt, or her father's other holdings had been auctioned off to cover the loss. The farm would go to the bank. The animals would be sold. Her brother and sister would go to the orphanage in the next county over, the one with the reputation for cruelty and indifference. And she would stand here, chained like an animal, while people she had known her entire life looked at her, as though she were something less than human. The shadows of the buildings grew longer as the sun moved westward, and still no one came. Mary Catherine had not expected anyone would. Her father's few friends had scattered like rabbits at the first sign of trouble. Her mother's family was back east and hadn't heard from the Walshes in so long they probably thought them all dead already. There was no one left but her and the weight of her father's mistakes and her own powerlessness in the face of them. She thought about running, but the chains were too heavy and too secure, and where would she run to anyway? The frontier was a big place, but it was also a small place where news traveled fast and strangers were suspect. A woman running alone would be caught by nightfall. That's when she saw him. He emerged from the heat shimmer that rose off the main road like something out of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. She couldn't decide which. He was a man of medium height and unremarkable build, the kind of man you might pass on the street without noticing. But his eyes were what stopped her, what made the breath catch in her chest. They were sad eyes, infinitely sad, the color of storm clouds gathering on the horizon before a tornado tears everything to pieces. He wore a long coat that had seen better days, and his hat was dusty and worn. He had the look of a man who had ridden a long way and had many more miles yet to go. He approached the judge's platform without hurrying, without any apparent concern for the menace that seemed to radiate from the gathered crowd. Tom Hartley, the patriarch of the ranch family, actually stood up from his chair as though preparing for a confrontation. But the stranger paid him no mind. Instead, he walked directly to where the shackles were secured to an iron post driven into the ground. And he looked at Mary Catherine with those sad eyes. "How much?" he asked. His voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but in the hush that had fallen over the square, everyone heard him. "This woman and her family's debt," he continued. "How much to settle it?" Judge Corbett stood up, his face flushing with indignation at being spoken to by this dusty stranger. $200, he said. "That's what the stolen cattle were worth by market rate. That's the price of her freedom." The man reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch. He opened it and began counting out gold coins onto the judge's table. 1, 2, 10. The coins clinked against the wood with a finality that seemed to echo through the whole town. When he reached 200, he stopped and cinched the pouch closed. "It's paid," he said. Then he looked at Tom Hartley. "You satisfied?" Hartley's jaw clenched, but he nodded slowly. There was no honor in denying a debt that had been paid in full. The stranger reached down and produced a key seemingly from nowhere. He fitted it to the lock on Mary Catherine's shackles, and they fell away with a sound like breaking chains in a prison yard. She stood there for a moment, her wrists bare and burning, hardly believing that she was free. The metal had been on her skin for nearly 12 hours, and it seemed impossible that she could be unbounded so quickly. "Come with me," the stranger said, and it wasn't a question or a demand. It was an invitation, extended with the gentleness of someone who understood what it meant to have nowhere else to go. She didn't think about it. She followed him. They walked out of Salvation Creek, while the sun painted the sky shades of amber and crimson, and no one tried to stop them. It was only as they reached the edge of town that Mary Catherine realized she had never even asked the stranger's name. She caught up to him, her legs feeling strange and weak after so long standing in one place. "Who are you?" she asked. "Why would you do that? You don't know me. You don't know my family." He continued walking toward a horse that was tied up near an old feed store, an animal as tired and worn as he appeared to be. "My name is Daniel Reeves," he said. "And I did it because I have seen enough suffering in this world to recognize it when I see it. And I have enough money from places I don't much like to think about to do something good with it once in a while." She mounted the horse behind him, and they rode out into the twilight. As they traveled, he explained that he had work for her. There was a ranch about 2 days' ride to the north where he had connections, a place that would take her on and give her honest work and a place to sleep. It wasn't charity, he told her firmly. She would earn her keep. She would work hard, and she would earn her way into a better life. "What about my brother and sister?" she asked. "They'll be sent to the orphanage." "Not if we prevent it," Daniel said. "We'll send word ahead to that ranch. The owner, a woman named Sarah Chen. She's kind in ways that are uncommon in this world. She'll understand about the children. There are families nearby who take in children and treat them right. Sarah can arrange it. Your brother and sister will be placed where they'll have a chance." And so began a different kind of journey for Mary Catherine Walsh. One that would define not just the rest of her life, but the lives of many others she would come to know. The ranch called the Copper Sun was sprawled across 100 acres of mixed grassland and scrubland, nestled in a valley that seemed to catch the light differently than anywhere else Mary Catherine had ever been. Sarah Chen was a woman of perhaps 50 years, with steel, gray hair that she wore in a long braid, and a face that had been weathered by the sun and by decisions, some of them hard ones. She greeted Daniel with a familiarity that spoke of a long history between them, and she assessed Mary Catherine with eyes that missed nothing. "You're in trouble," Sarah said, not unkindly. "My father was," Mary Catherine replied. "He's dead now. And you're here because of Daniel's foolish charity." Sarah continued, but there was a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "He does this sometimes. Shows up with some broken thing in tow and expects me to fix it. Come on. I'll show you where you'll sleep and what your work will be." The work was hard but honest. Mary Catherine began at dawn each day, helping with the livestock, mending fences, preparing food for the ranch hands and the family. She learned skills she had never had the opportunity to learn at home. How to break a horse with patience rather than force. How to read the weather in the way the birds flew, and the way the wind changed. How to speak to animals in a voice that was firm, but never cruel. Sarah taught her these things not out of kindness exactly, but out of respect. She seemed to recognize in Mary Catherine a strength that had been forged in the fires of desperation, and she worked to polish that strength into something useful. It was in the second week that Daniel took her out to the far pasture to mend a fence that had been damaged in a storm. They worked in silence for a long time, setting new posts and threading new wire. As the sun began to descend toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and copper, Daniel finally spoke. "Sarah told me about your siblings," he said. "They're placed now. Your brother with a family that farms cotton 10 miles northeast of here. Your sister with a family that runs the general store in the next town. They're safe. They'll have decent lives." Mary Catherine felt something loosen in her chest. Something that had been wound so tight she had almost forgotten it was there. She had to sit down on the grass for a moment, needing to process the weight of that relief. "How do I repay you?" she asked. $200 was a fortune, and now this, helping my family. "I don't have anything to give you." Daniel was quiet for a long time, looking out at the grassland that stretched toward the mountains in the distance. "There's no repayment," he said finally. "When I was young, I was headed down a bad road. I was angry and stupid, and I was about to make choices that would have destroyed me. A man I didn't know stepped in and saved me from myself. He didn't ask for repayment either. He just said to me, 'Someday when you're in a position to help someone else, you do it.' That's how the world gets better. Not through revenge or balance sheets, but through grace extended when it's least expected." "And have you helped many people?" Mary Catherine asked. "A few," Daniel said. "Not as many as I would like. The thing is, most people don't want help. They're too proud or too broken or too convinced that they deserve what they're getting. But every once in a while, you meet someone like you, someone who's been knocked down by circumstances but hasn't given up. Those are the people worth saving." The seasons turned. Mary Catherine's wrists healed, and then the scars faded until there was barely any mark left to show what had happened to her. She grew stronger, both in body and in spirit. She became indispensable to the running of the Copper Sun, and Sarah began to look at her less as an employee and more as a daughter. She would sometimes find Sarah watching her work with an expression of quiet approval, and it filled her with a sense of belonging that she had thought had died along with her father. But Daniel remained distant, kind but always somewhat removed. He would come and go from the ranch without warning, disappearing for weeks or even months at a time, and returning with little explanation for where he had been or what he had been doing. Mary Catherine asked Sarah about it once. "He's a complicated man," Sarah said simply. "He's done things in his life that weigh on him. He rides because he can't stay still. He helps people because he needs to balance the scales somehow, though I've told him 1,000 times that they can never really be balanced, not in this life. He'll never stay. But while he's here, he brings something to this place. A kind of grace." It was on a night when Daniel was preparing to leave again that Mary Catherine found him saddling his horse in the barn. The stars were bright overhead, and the air was cool and clean. She had come to say goodbye, as she had learned to do, knowing that every time might be the last time. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did for me, for what you continue to do. You've changed everything." Daniel paused in his work and turned to look at her. Even in the dim light of the barn, she could see those sad eyes, but they seemed slightly less sad than they had been that day in Salvation Creek. "You changed it yourself," he said. "I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it and made a life on the other side. Will you ever come back?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "But I can't promise when. The work I do, it pulls me away sometimes for months at a time. But I'll always come back here. This place has become like home to me, and you and Sarah are like family. That means something. He rode out into the darkness, and Mary Catherine stood in the barn long after his horse had disappeared, thinking about the nature of grace, and how it often came in the form of a stranger with sad eyes, who asked nothing in return except that you use the gift of your freedom wisely. 5 years passed. Mary Catherine became not just a worker on the Copper Sun, but a partner in the ranch's operation. She had a hand in every decision, and her wisdom often proved valuable. She had saved money and purchased a small parcel of land adjacent to the ranch, where she had started a small operation of her own, raising horses that were known throughout the territory for their gentle temperament and solid training. People came from miles around to buy from her, and she had built a reputation as a woman who understood animals in a way that was almost mystical. And then one day, while Mary Catherine was working in the corral with a particularly difficult Mustang, a young man rode up to the ranch gates. He was perhaps 20 years old, lean and hungry looking, with the haunted expression of someone running from something. He asked for work, and Sarah, following the philosophy that seemed to run through the entire ranch, gave it to him without asking too many questions. His name was Thomas, and Mary Catherine recognized him for what he was from the moment she looked at him. He was someone on the edge, someone standing at a fork in the road and not knowing which way to go. She had been that person once, and she knew what it felt like. She befriended him. She taught him the work of the ranch, but more importantly, she talked to him. She told him about her father and his mistakes, about standing in chains in the town square, about Daniel Reeves appearing out of nowhere with gold coins and grace. "What are you running from?" she asked him one afternoon as they worked together mending fences. Thomas was quiet for a long time. "I killed a man," he finally said. "Back east. He deserved it, or I thought he did. He was beating on my sister. I went after him, and I lost control. I hit him too hard, too many times. By the time I stopped, he was dead, and I was holding a rock with blood on it. I ran. I've been running ever since." Mary Catherine didn't judge him. She had learned that judgment was easy and wisdom was hard. "What do you want?" she asked instead. "Not what you deserve or what the law wants. What do you want?" Thomas looked at her with surprise, as though no one had ever asked him such a question. "I want to be different than I am," he said finally. "I want to be a man who hasn't killed anyone, but I can't change what's already done." "No," Mary Catherine agreed. "But you can change what comes next. You can stay here and work and build something. You can prove to yourself that you're more than that one moment, that one choice. Or you can keep running forever and eventually run off the edge of the earth." Thomas stayed. Over the following years, he became not just a worker on the ranch, but a beloved member of the community. He fell in love with a woman from the nearby town and married her. He had children of his own. And eventually, he took on a position of leadership at the ranch, helping to manage the herds and the daily operations. One evening, when Thomas was dealing with a younger man who had shown up at the ranch gates with desperation in his eyes and hunger in his belly, Mary Catherine watched from a distance as Thomas explained the philosophy of the place to him. She heard echoes of Daniel Reeves in Thomas's words, and she realized that grace had a way of spreading outward, rippling across people, and time like stones thrown into still water. It was during that same year that Daniel came back to the ranch after an absence of nearly 3 years. He was older now, his hair touched with gray, and his sad eyes seemed to carry even more weight than before. Mary Catherine found him in the barn, the same place where he had saddled his horse on so many other occasions. "You've done something remarkable here," he said, looking at her with an expression that was almost like pride. "I can see it in the way this place runs, in the people who work here. You've taken what I gave you and transformed it into something that keeps giving itself away to others." "I learned from the best," Mary Catherine said. "I learned from you." Daniel shook his head. "I just showed you one way of living. You're the one who understood it deeply enough to make it permanent, to build it into the very foundation of this place, so that it would outlast any one person. That's the real grace. That's how the world actually changes." He didn't stay long that visit. A few days later, he was gone again, disappearing into the landscape as he always did. But before he left, he took Mary Catherine aside and handed her a leather journal. "This is for you," he said. "It contains a record of every person I've helped in the last 10 years. Their names, their stories, where they went afterward. I want you to know that you weren't alone. All those times I was gone, I was doing this, helping others the way I helped you. And I want you to know that most of them survived. Most of them went on to build better lives. That's something worth knowing." Mary Catherine read that journal countless times. She saw the names and the stories, and she realized that she was part of something larger than herself, part of a chain of grace that stretched backward through time and forward into the future. Each person Daniel had helped had the potential to help others. Each life transformed could become a seed of transformation for others. Years later, when Mary Catherine was getting older herself, she began to notice young people appearing at the ranch gates with increasing regularity, people with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. And she welcomed them all, just as she had been welcomed. She found that she had money to help with, just as Daniel had. She found that she had wisdom to share, knowledge gathered through years of hard work and harder living. She never saw Daniel Reeves again. There came a year when a traveler passed through, bringing word that Daniel had been found dead in a small town in Mexico, shot in a saloon over something that never got properly explained. The man who had saved her, the man with sad eyes who'd extended grace when she needed it most, was gone from the world. But his legacy lived on. It lived in Mary Catherine and in every person she had helped. It lived in Thomas and in the changes he brought to the places where he worked. It lived in the careful expansion of kindness that spread through the frontier territories like ivy growing on a stone wall, gradually covering everything with something alive and green. Mary Catherine Walsh built a good life. She never married. There was never time and she never felt the need. But she was not lonely. She had Sarah Chen, who remained her closest friend until Sarah's death at the age of 83. She had Thomas and his family. She had the countless young people who came through the ranch and went out to build their own lives elsewhere, carrying with them the knowledge that grace was real and that second chances could be given to those who were willing to seize them and use them well. When she was in her 60s, a young woman showed up at the ranch gates. She was thin and frightened, and she carried with her the particular kind of desperation that comes from believing that your life is worth less than nothing. Mary Catherine recognized her immediately, not because she knew her, but because she recognized herself. "What's your name?" Mary Catherine asked. "Catherine," the girl said softly. "Catherine Miles." Mary Catherine smiled and she took the girl's hand. "Welcome," she said. "Let me show you around." As they walked through the ranch, passing the barns and the corrals and the bunkhouses, Mary Catherine began to tell the girl her story. She told her about her father and his mistakes, about standing in chains in Salvation Creek, about a man with sad eyes who had asked nothing, but offered everything. She told her about learning to work hard, and to believe that tomorrow could be different from today, that the future was not fixed but was something you could help shape through the choices you made in the present. "Will I be able to forget?" Catherine asked. "Will the bad things stop hurting?" "No," Mary Catherine said honestly. "But they'll fade into the background of your life. They'll become less sharp, less immediate. And you'll build new memories, good memories. Memories of triumph and kindness and moments when you realized that you were capable of more than you ever thought you could be. The bad won't go away, but it won't be all there is anymore." Catherine stayed at the Copper Sun for 3 years. She learned the skills of ranch work, and more importantly, she learned to value herself. When she left, she went to the valley to the west, where she heard there was a small settlement forming. And she started a boarding house there, a place where people who were down on their luck could find shelter and work and the possibility of redemption. In this way, the cycle continued. Grace given became grace extended. One life saved gave rise to another life saved, and then another, like links in a chain forged from kindness and stretched across the vast landscape of the frontier. Mary Catherine Walsh lived to be 91 years old. She died peacefully in her sleep at the Copper Sun, with Thomas at her side, in a room full of people whose lives she had touched. People whose gratitude and love filled the room like warmth from a fire on a cold night. They buried her in the cemetery at the edge of the ranch, and they carved into her tombstone words that summed up everything she had learned in her long life. She stood in chains until an angel came. She became an angel to others. But perhaps the most fitting epitaph was not on any stone, but in the lives that continued after her. In the ripples of grace that spread outward, through all the people she had helped, and through all the people those people helped in turn, because that was the real legacy of Daniel Reeves and Mary Catherine Walsh, not monuments or grand gestures, but the quiet, persistent understanding that a single act of grace, a single moment of choosing kindness over judgment or despair, could change not just one person's life, but could set into motion a chain reaction of goodness that would echo through generations. In the years that followed, historians would come to the frontier territories and would marvel at pockets of unusual civility, at communities where the poor and the desperate were treated with more respect and kindness than was common in those rough and often brutal times. They would wonder about the origins of this kindness, this unusual philosophy of redemption and second chances. If they asked the right people, they would hear stories about a woman named Mary Catherine Walsh and a man named Daniel Reeves, about a day in Salvation Creek when chains were broken and a life was saved. But most of the time, the kindness persisted without any particular person claiming credit for it, passed from hand to hand like a precious stone, each person understanding on some deep level that they had received grace when they needed it most, and that the only appropriate response was to pass that grace along. That was the true frontier. Not the geographic expansion of a nation westward across the land, but the expansion of human decency and compassion in the hearts of ordinary people. It was a frontier where chains were broken not by force, but by the simple choice of one person to help another. It was a frontier where sadness could be transformed into purpose, where desperation could become determination, where a moment in the dust of a small town could ripple outward and touch the lives of thousands of people who would never know the name of the woman who stood in chains, or the man with sad eyes who set her free.